Okay, thank you, everyone.
How it is.
Good morning, everyone.
Well, good morning. And Marita, thank you. Thank you so much for hosting our discussion as always. And thank you everyone for joining today. You see, we have a few new visitors to the discussion. And we have a real treat today. We've only had, I think we've only had 2 poems that we've discussed before by living poets. So today we have a third, and as a special treat, we have that poet who has agreed to read her poem. And let me just introduce Gail Mazur, one of my favorite poets, one of my favorite people, dear friend. And this is a poem I have loved for many years. And I have to say, one of the things that was in the back of my mind when we started doing these poetry discussions is that at some point in relation to the time of year, I really wanted to do Gail's poem, Baseball. And Gail, it's a poem that was in her very first book that is also included in her very beautiful latest book, Land's End, New and Selected Poems. And Gail, would you please read your poem or introduce it or whatever you like?
I think those are the only 2 options. I mean, I know you're not going to ask me to throw it away.
True.
I would love to, and I'm so happy to be doing this in this program, Lloyd, because I just think this conversation is called Let's Talk About a Poem that Lloyd, can everybody hear me? That Lloyd has initiated has been wonderful and perfect for this time when we're shut in and don't go to poetry readings with other people around us or much else with other people around us. So thank you, Lloyd. It was a brilliant creation that you made in your appointment to this post. And you will be much rewarded here and in heaven. Heaven, that's what I'm going to talk about next. This poem that I'm going to read, as Lloyd said, was a very early poem. And it's not an accident that it's in 9 stanzas. And they're different lengths or different times. It's called Baseball. I don't really want to say anything else about it. Some of you might not be familiar with Bruegel's painting of Icarus, who flew too near to the sun with his wax wings and is falling while the world goes on without noticing, the world of the painting. So this is the poem, Baseball. The game of baseball is not a metaphor, and I know it's not really life. The chalky green diamond, the lovely dusty brown lanes I see from airplanes multiplying around the cities are only neat playing fields. Their structure is not the frame of history carved out of forest. That is not what I see on my ascent. And down in the stadium, the veteran catcher guiding the young pitcher through the innings, the line of concentration between them. That delicate filament is not like the way you are helping me, only it reminds me when I strain for analogies, the way a rookie strains for perfection, and the veteran in his wisdom seems to promise it. It glows from his upheld glove. And the man in front of me in the grandstand, drinking banana daiquiris from a thermos, continuing through a whole dinner to the aromatic cigar, even as our team is shut out, nearly hitless. He is not like the farmer that Auden speaks of in Bruegel's Icarus, or the four inevitable woman-hating drunkards yelling, hugging each other, and moving up and down continually for more beer. And the young wife trying to understand what a full count could be to please her husband, happy in his old dreams. Or the little boy in the Yankees cap already nodding off to sleep against his father, program and popcorn memories sliding into the future. And the old woman from Lincoln, Maine, screaming at the Yankee slugger with wounded knees to break his leg. This is not a microcosm, not even a slice of life. And the terrible slumps when the greatest hitter mysteriously goes hitless for weeks, or the pitcher's stuff is all junk, who threw like a magician all last month, or the days when our guys look like Senate cops, slipping, bumping each other, then suddenly the play that wasn't humanly possible, the kid we know isn't ready for the big leagues, leaps into the air to catch a ball that should have gone downtown, and coming off the field is hugged and bottom slapped by the sudden sorcerer, the winning team. The question of what makes a man slump when his form, his eye, his power aren't to blame. This isn't like the bad luck that hounds us, and his frustration in the games, not like our deep rage for disappointing ourselves. The ballpark is an artifact, manicured, safe, seen in an Easter egg. And the order of the ball game, the firm structure with the mystery of accidents always contained, not the wild field we wander in, where I'm trying to recite the rules, to repeat the statistics of the game, and the wind keeps carrying my words away. Seen in an Easter egg is a phrase from the great essay that John Updike wrote about Ted Williams, the great Red Sox slugger's last game. His description of Fenway Park was as a scene in an Easter egg. And it was the jewel, I think it still is, of Major League Baseball parks. It's one of the smallest.
Gail, thank you. Wonderful to hear you read this poem. What would you like to hear from an audience about this poem?
Applause.
Yeah. Enough said. I think you got a lot of inaudible applause.
I would love to hear people's connection to the feeling of the poem. You know, I mean, if you grow up completely unathletic, I mean, 100% unathletic, and grow up loving baseball, you sort of, you kind of have to explain it to yourself. You know, the reason for that but it's an ongoing story that we have for half the year, whether it's triumphal or disappointing. And it's the slowest of the games. And it's narrated step by step in the broadcasts of them. I just, I would actually love to hear people's response to the game as well as the poem, you know.
Catherine,
I have two questions. Do you keep score when you go to a game?
I'm sorry, what?
Do you keep score when you go to a game?
Oh, no.
Uh,
No.
And was this written before or after A. Bartlett Giametti's piece about baseball?
Before or after what?
The wonderful piece about baseball that A. Bartlett Giametti wrote. You don't know that piece?
I do know it, but I don't remember when I
It's
wrote
the
it.
other
When,
paean to baseball, I know.
Baseball breaks your heart.
Yeah.
do you remember when that was? I can't, I love that piece, but
Baseball breaks your heart.
right.
do you know when that was written? Around when? Yeah.
Or Pete Rose killed him.
I will tell you how I wrote this poem. 19 what? I wrote this poem when I was daydreaming and not thinking about baseball. And I was actually reading a literary magazine that wasn't very good. And I suddenly wrote down like 6 rather ordinary words that were in the poem.
Oh,
In the poem that I was in the magazine that I was reading. And this had never happened to me before. Then I wrote the poem as if it had all been piling up in my brain, waiting for something to light the match, which those 6 words did. And afterwards, I didn't even know if any of the words were still in the poem when I finished it. It was just, so if I mean, I think probably the 2 literary influences that came into the poem, and it was also an unusual poem in that I did almost no revision at all, were it was so spontaneous. Life should be like that, or poetry reading should be like that.
Oh, I see.
It so seldom is. Were Bruegel's Auden's poem about Bruegel's Icarus. I mean, Auden's poem. And the John Updike essay, which had been in my mind and heart from the time it was published. And I also don't know when that was, except that it had to have been in the 60s because it was about Ted Williams' retirement. And I grew up, my father's store was next to Fenway Park. And in fact, on game days, he suddenly had a lot of dear old friends looking for parking spaces, you know. But my father had a little relationship with Ted Williams. I mean, they talked about fishing. He came into the store and, you know, I have a photograph of them together. I think that Bart Giamatti's piece was after this. I'm pretty sure. I mean, it's hard to keep all these decades in mind when you've lived so many of them. But let's see, his son is an actor who's probably about 60, right? So he'd be about 90. So that was about 40 years ago. When did I rate baseball? I don't know.
I am wondering if anyone here today who is not particularly a baseball fan or doesn't particularly follow baseball, what you get from this poem or what you like about this poem, or aren't aren't there very many of you who have absolutely no interest in baseball, who would admit it?
Silence overall.
Well, let's
Well, let's turn it around and say that those of us who spend too many hours of our life following the Red Sox,
Doing what?
following the Red Sox,
Yeah.
you know, by the fourth inning of your poem, where the team inexplicably falls out of first place and is struggling to get into the wild card, it all seems very immediate.
Right. And it's been the story of the Red Sox.
Sure.
I mean, I think if I had grown up in New York City as a Yankees fan, say, as opposed to a Dodgers fan, this poem would never been written. This, you know,
Yeah.
I think we really. I mean, I remember 35 years ago, being in my next door neighbor whom we had never had many conversations outside of Harvard bookstore, and we had just blown it again in the playoffs. And he said, you know, I mean, it's sort of like we were in this tragedy together. That's what it was to be a Red Sox fan until
2004.
Four.
You know, Lloyd and Gail,
hi, Udi.
I find the poem remarkable in several ways. First of all, the accuracy of the description of both the park and the people who were attending the ball game. It's all so familiar: the beer and the drinking and the hugging and the sleeping and the rest. And it leads us into a completely different direction from what it seems to me the poem is really about, which is the artist's life, the struggle to create, and it all gets blown away, it gets distracted, and that's what for me winds up tying up the poem and making it a really wonderful, tragic expression of life, and of course specifically of the artist's attempt to create something in the face of these delicious distractions which have a destructive aspect. We're scared to death of those drinkers, of those rednecks and the rest, and it's very, very frightening in many ways. As for the issue should be raised as to what the hell is the nature of fandom? What is that possesses our minds, our souls, our attention day after day, wasting our time while we are riveted to win or loss?
I would agree with Yehudi. I would have said that the poem is about enchantment, is about magic, and the kind of magic that you don't know how it's working on you. And I think of that because my big brother played baseball and did magic tricks. And and I was just always in awe, and it just made me immerse myself in it and think this is happening and it's not happening. This is everything, but it's just some tricks. And but it's more than that. So I don't know. Enchantment is what, and that we love to be irresistibly enchanted by things and want to participate in it and don't even mind if we, I mean, especially don't mind if we can't figure it out or get it right, because enchantment should always be a little bit out of reach. I don't know. That's the effect on me. And if I can indulge in a technical point, I just love how effortlessly the poem casts its spell with negatives. It's not this, it's not that. And here's another thing that it's not, like saying, don't think about a hippopotamus. The magic of the way that puts a hippopotamus in your brain. So how do words do it? How do games do it? How do magicians do it? What fun it is that it keeps getting away from us. That's what the poem's about for me.
I would go back to Yehudi's point and look at the beginning of the poem. And Jennifer's point also about those negatives. The game of baseball is not a metaphor. And then imagine, I mean, one of the things we get from the poem, I think, is the way
It's a metaphor.
the game of baseball is a metaphor, and that it does have to do with art, and it has to do with writing and how we write about the things that we're passionate about, and the way we're kind of constantly throughout the entire poem kind of debating, well, it's not a metaphor, it is a metaphor, it's not a metaphor, it is a metaphor. And the way the poem is kind of is sort of playing with our mind, with our minds, and I think that kind of game with the reader,
Like baseball.
like baseball.
No.
And I would also, I would just also say that one of the things that I really love about this poem is the way, by, in an instant, it can turn from being very funny to being really poignant, and that I don't think you even need to be a baseball fan or know anything about baseball to feel those emotional turns in the poem. I mean, does that make sense?
Sure.
Well, Lloyd, this is sort of a tangent to what you're talking about, but I feel as if I'm running towards home plate now. And the poem reminds me so much of Wallace Stevens, The Idea of Order at Key West.
Wow.
And it's the constellations in that poem provide a kind of meaning or pseudo meaning, the same way that baseball gives our lives meaning in this poem. And we have to figure out how much to give it meaning. And so it also includes the writer in it. But it's just sort of a very practical variation of that poem. And this poem, it compares very well to Stevens' poem. I really love this poem. And the subtlety of it, and Gail's sure hand in ordering these details. It really is wonderful. So, and now I'm sliding into home plate.
Well, also the game has come. It doesn't have to go into extra innings. because that's what do they call it when someone hits the triumphant run of the last of the night?
Yeah, the walk-off home run, the walk-off hit.
That last bit of the paragraph is a walk-off and turns the whole thing. I mean, it makes it all so moving and meaningful, really. It's not like, what's the line of that French poet who was asked, Maître, how do you end a poem? He said, end a poem? I never end a poem, I abandon it.
That's Valerie. A poem
Valerie.
never finished,
Yeah.
only
I
abandoned.
never finished. Isn't that a wonderful line? I love it.
Yeah.
Can I say something, Lloyd, about the the technique that I think gets us to this state that where it's both is or isn't a metaphor, and that we see things in different ways? I think it's that she's endlessly shifting perspective. And when I read this poem, I pictured the last scene in Forrest Gump, the feather. So the feather, if you remember, is a close-up, then it suddenly flies away. We see the city from a distance, then we see it intimately. And I feel like this poem is endlessly doing that. The camera is taking us so close. We look into the heart of the little couple where the woman's learning the poem, or the boy who's sleeping. Then suddenly we're way above it. We're seeing from an airplane as if we're looking down and seeing designs, and then we zoom in again until, like a feather, we blow away at the end. The poet's mind can be in and out of all these realities, and then the words maybe don't hold, and then we see it disappear.
Oh, that's great.
Stephen, I like that second stanza, and like the way it ends with the promise glowing from the upheld glove.
Yes.
It could almost end there. And I think what you're saying in the change of perspective, each poem arrives at just some beautiful, each stanza arrives at something. In that one is, of course, we can't see a filament between the catcher and the pitcher, but we feel it. And there's the mysterious you addressed in the middle of that too, that we just glide right by, but we feel the feeling of that. And I think there are different feelings in each stanzas that glow like that promise of the upheld glove.
Yes, perfect.
And don't forget Wallace Stevens' other poem, 9 Ways of Looking at Baseball.
Right.
Well, I think it was John. I think it was John who said something about, they used the phrase giving baseball meaning. And I think that part of the genius of the poem is that the speaker sort of abjures the meaning, and we are given permission to not invest it with meaning, which frees us to invest it with meaning.
Exactly.
And I think that's a very successful, the tone is established right away. I know it's not really life. Well, immediately as the listener to this, you think, oh, you're not having something crammed down your throat. And this brings you in. That's kind of a low level way of expressing it, but I think that the tone is what is at the clincher. Oh, it's only neat playing fields. Huh, well, okay.
Yeah.
So Mary wants to say something.
Oh, Mary, please.
I probably should have raised my hand earlier when you said, would anyone who isn't terribly familiar with baseball and so on, I should have raised it then. But I lived right near, I lived in Queens for many, many years. And I remember hearing, it sounded like a distant wave when the audience was really going wild. And I was close enough so that, I could just hear it. It was so strange. Anyway, and of course I've had baseball lovers in my life. So I'm not a baseball person. So I can't speak very much about the game and whatever. But as a kind of, as one of the ignorant readers, I was struck by so many things in this poem. And I think I didn't raise my hand because I think I get the deep connection that people have with their, you know, that fandom magic, right, between the players and the team and the audience. And I love the way Gail works with that. We see it from so many different angles and at so many different depths. So I feel like I get in on it. This poem helps me get in on it, and I kind of feel like, yeah, I can you know, kind of pretend to be a baseball person for a little while, because it's so moving and true and authentic. But one of the things that strikes me about it, I wanted to say a little something about the negatives, and I think it was Jennifer's point about the magical. One of the things that I love about the is nots, the what is it? There's a term for it, I think, something like definition by subtraction, or I don't know. I'm no good with those things. But it creates a sense that this thing is not definable. That we're talking about something that's not nameable, and it gives it this kind of magical, profound aspect that that kind of syncs up in a way with the idea of the ascent and the sense of hovering. I feel as if there's something in the poem that is kind of wind-like, or I'm really I love the use of ascent in the beginning and the wind at the end, in the sense that we're kind of hovering, looking at this thing that's made out of limits, and Gail just shows the limitlessness of it. I don't know.
Yeah.
I have a variation on that theme, Mary, about how do I feel about baseball. As a child, I was mad about it. I lived in Vermont. I was a Dodgers fan. How did I know about the Dodgers? From the radio. So I'm wondering if you, Gail, were influenced at all by hearing baseball called on the radio. To me, that was part of the magic. It was coming through the airwaves. And then as an adult, I became less interested. I follow casually, but it's not passionate the way I was when I was a child. But this poem captures whatever it was that made me passionate as a child. And I think in my mind, it's connected with hearing the calling of the games on the radio, which to me is also part of the long tradition. I would rather listen than watch.
Well, also the here in Boston, we always had broadcasters whom I would call narrators, who had their own figurative, you know, expressions for, like, if it was a cloudless day, and that was sort of hard on the hitters, the broadcaster said, "No angels in the sky today." Yeah.
Yeah, each broadcaster had his own approach, and some were really good at it in that way that you're talking about.
And they were narrators, unlike in faster, tougher professional games. You know, they really had time to fill. I mean, there were always another pitcher warming up. They were doing a lot going on, but I'm so thrilled by this conversation, because you know, when you write a poem, when I write a poem, I don't analyze it. You know, I'm just grateful. I'm just grateful that it came out, and this one particularly. And my feelings about baseball, I think, were very tied up with my father and Ted Williams. And my brother. I remember when we were on the Cape, and didn't get good reception on the radio. I remember my brother sitting out, keeping the car running, listening to the car radio of a Sox game. I bet he's here. I bet he doesn't remember that. But I remember thinking he's going to be in big trouble, because the battery is going to die.
Right.
But, it was very much a part of our childhood. Also, it was the only game, softball was the only game that I ever participated in at all. Not much, but I felt like I could feel it physically, what it was to hold a bat and try to hit a ball. But the rest, is those of you who write poems know, how they come out is so often a mystery because they're not plotted, at least for me. So it's so much easier and wonderful to hear you talk about it than for me to talk about it.
Wait.
How many times have people told you that you've hit a home run with this poem? Has everybody said that?
Never. Poets are such baseball nerds.
You knocked it out of the park in this case.
Right.
Gail,
Who is
Yehudi.
Yehudi? Yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to ask Gail if she, reviewing a poem from a long time ago, wonders who wrote it.
In a way, I know what you mean. I think, how did I do that?
How did I do that?
Yeah. I mean, the poems that really come inspired, that's not all our works aren't by their inspiration, and more perspiration than inspiration. But this one, I remember writing it because I remember those 6 words that I took from the not very good poetry magazine, but how I was in a zone.
Yeah.
And you can't put yourself in a zone.
Metaphor for baseball.
Right.
In fact, you say it in the poem. You say the pitcher who won a month ago was nothing but magic, and he hasn't changed. Ability hasn't changed, but it's not there. All of a sudden it fails us. That was one of the heartbreaking parts to me, because if you ever do a poem that feels like you got a little bit of magic, and then you can't make it happen the next day or the next day, you feel suddenly abandoned.
Right, and that game is blown.
Yeah, that's one of the things I really liked about it, is the unexpected, the arrival of the unexpected. And okay, it's in some sort of a form, it's a poem on a page, but I couldn't help it. I have to out myself and say, since I grew up on Long Island, we were a Yankees family. Sorry, all you Red Sox fans.
Okay.
And grew up during Mantle and Maris, slugfests. And my dad's idol was Mickey Mantle, to the extent that I actually read a couple of biographies of Mickey Mantle. But the only time we actually went to a game was at the very, very end of his career. And he struck out every time he came to bat.
He was so beat up.
He just looked absolutely, limping out there and striking out over and over again. And I thought, at the time, I just thought I was so frustrated, that here I had waited all this time to see the great player and he struck out at bat. And I thought about that a lot as metaphor and as life. And, just kind of, that was my only time seeing Mickey Mantle. But I feel like the poem talks exactly about that it can be great one day. It's like what Stephen said, it's great one day and it's terrible the next, and you can't always predict. And the poem really gets at that sense of the unexpectedness of life. And it says, the firm structure with the mystery of accidents always contained. not the wild field we wander in. But I think actually it is a lot like the wild field we wander in, of course.
Except the rules are defined.
They are, and the game, well, but even the ending of baseball, it's so weird. When does it end? I mean, it could theoretically go on forever, a game.
More,
Yeah, yeah, still.
I suppose, yeah.
As a form.
I want to go back to the text for a moment, and where, of course, I'm instantly captivated by the opening line, and in a way, the challenge of that opening line. But then the first stanza kind of begins with one of the largest images or ideas in the poem. Their structure, so about the baseball field seen from the air, their structure is not the frame of history carved out of forest. So it begins with with almost the largest possible sense of the world, the frame of history carved out of forest. And then we go down into the ballpark to something so infinitesimally delicate and intangible, that delicate filament between the catcher and the pitcher is not like the way you are helping me. Only it reminds me when I strain for analogies. So there's metaphor and then analogies. And obviously that has to do with writing, but also has to do with the most intimate personal connection, that we're moving from history carved out of forest to this delicate filament that is the intangible way that we help one another, that people, presumably someone very close to you, helps you in that almost intangible way. I find that just incredibly moving, and that the poem, but by the time you get to that point in the second stanza, for one thing, I totally trust the writer, who can see from this very large perspective as well as from this incredibly intimate perspective. Jennifer, you were about to say something, I think.
No, that's
Oh.
okay. Keep going.
Okay. Well, I think that's sort of the that's kind of my that's really my first point. And then by the third stanza, one of my favorite things in the poem are the banana daiquiris. And I think they're hilarious. It's the most, I totally believe it, but it seems to me it's the unlikeliest drink that one might have in a thermos at at Fenway Park.
And of
Oh,
course,
not if you look.
and of course, now, one of the things that has changed in our lives, you could never bring a thermos of banana daiquiris to the ballpark these days.
Right,
uh,
right, right.
In fact, the other thing that struck me about the time frame is that when I grew up and Gail grew up, and you listen to baseball, none of us had the Icarus-like view of baseball diamonds from the air. That was a much later revelation. I have vivid memories of seeing that also for the first time after, but I was already pretty well grown up before that perspective, Montgolfier perspective was possible. You knew it from the ground. You didn't know it from this kind of aerial setting.
And then one of the things about that is that there are hundreds of them in every state.
Yeah.
That we're not talking about Fenway Park. It's like baseball from the air. Baseball is the defining structure of our communal life or something.
Yeah.
All those sandy base paths.
Gail, you just presented a very short view of human civilization with the bananas in that worldview, because the bananas refer to the forest, and in the forest there are monkeys who eat the bananas, and that they have eventually progressed to humans creating baseball, which are now all over the land. That is our civilization. And so it's this incredible scope. This poem charts all of human civilization. And the other thing I like about the poem is I normally distrust when a poem is brought into a poem, and that is Auden's poem. But it's really very sly and brilliant of Gail to do that, and to say that that guy with the daiquiris is not like the farmer, when in fact, this poem is filled with farmers. There's the veteran catcher, there's the young pitcher, the man in front of me, the four inevitable women-hating drunkards, and the young wife. All of these are witnesses to the event that's going on. And so Gail has a sly way of contradicting herself, I think. And it's really quite beautiful in doing that.
I was reminded of the image of baseball fields from the air. I was reminded of the reason that the Cuban Missile Crisis was discovered is that the aerial pictures around the areas where the missiles were being put in showed soccer fields instead of baseball fields. So they knew that must have been a Soviet presence because, they're so baseball mad in Cuba. It just struck me as being such an American, North American concept, the looking out the window and just seeing endless baseball fields from the sky.
Wendell, you had your hand up.
Yes, I think for me, part of the power of the poem is the nostalgia it evokes of what isn't anymore, and yet, and how much of the meaning of my life I can have by connecting by the people I am connected to with baseball, listening to Kansas City Athletics while playing pitch with my grandfather, for example. I'm sure we all share those kinds of the intense memory. And at one point as a writer, we all wanted to be Roger and Gail so that we could go to we could make we could make a living writing a long piece on the baseball season once or twice a year in New Yorker. Even though of course he did much more than that, but that was the part that attracted about his, and all of that is called right to my mind by this poem.
Thank you. Thank you.
Could I add one
Um,
quick thing to Wendell's comment?
Please. Yeah.
She actually, and she does that in the poem when she goes, that has the boy who's sleeping on his father, because that boy is already remembering this as if he was a man thinking back to the popcorn and the fields. And our son just took our grandson to his first Red Sox game. And when he came back home and I asked him about it, this is his report. He said, I got the Cracker Jacks and it had 2 prizes in it. And I ate a hot dog and it was so loud. So that was his summation. And I could picture him like the boy leaning on his father here by the time he's the old man thinking back, or like Wendell playing with his dad. I remember playing catch in the driveway with my dad and the Brooklyn Dodgers on the radio. And we create that world again when we grow up.
That stanza, the 1, 2, 3, 4, the fourth stanza, that cast of characters in the baseball stands in that stanza is just I find also this wonderful combination of it's so touching, it's so poignant, the young wife trying to understand what a full count can be, down to the old woman from Lincoln, Maine, screaming at the Yankee slugger with wounded knees to break his leg. That from that sort of tender bewilderment to this absolutely vicious hostility on from maybe an unlikely source, with the touching scene of the little boy falling asleep. Yeah, baseball memories sliding into the future.
Jessica has her hand up, Lloyd.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, please.
Just whenever, I didn't want to interrupt.
No, go ahead, please.
So this is, oh, let me put my hand down. Okay. This is back a comment on the first stanza. I really liked that as well. I really thought it just added a whole nother dimension to the poem. I was also kind of thinking it in light of kind of today's time or social media or something where we just, even now we just have much, we can see so much more, so many more people. And that's really what I got from that. So you're in the airplane and you see hundreds and hundreds of different baseball diamonds. But then in the second stanza, we're right down in it. And you don't see all of those distractions of the hundreds other fields. You see you and your family and kind of this very hometown hero kind of feel. And that's kind of one thing I took away from it, was just kind of reminding that even if there's so many other fields and so many other things in the world, like that's really what's important, is just really immersing yourself in like the family and where you are. So
thank you. Yeah. I like the short inning, the 2-line inning. This is not a microcosm, not even a slice of life, which takes us, the poem is so wonderfully structured because it's so aware of where it is and where it's been. And just in case you've forgotten the opening line, by the time you get to this point in the poem, we're brought back to the central sort of metaphor about baseball not being a metaphor. And then I think you've already pointed out this there's a kind of great sadness in that next stanza about the terrible slumps, when the greatest hitter mysteriously goes hitless for weeks, and how I think you've already talked about how universal that is, how much it can be about writing a poem or just any kind of human experience that, you know.
Lloyd, I love that. I mean, following your point about the two line, then we have this long one that doesn't make the knot in it. That doesn't, I mean, you said the structure is wonderful. It's this musical variation on when am I going to tell you that this is not what I'm telling you. Right. It is. And, you know, with a comedian's or a musician's or a poet's instinct there, that long, terrible, the stanza that starts with the terrible slumps that we were all so quick to identify with, doesn't, right, which includes redemption in its second half, it doesn't say anywhere in that stanza that that's not what it is. That's what's launched in the little slice of the two line stanza.
Right.
And then it's not till the stanza after it where it says, this isn't like the bad luck that hounds us, even though we've just felt that it is. And that, I just think that's so wonderful in this poem, that something that could collapse into a flat joke or a gimmick, it works because of the different wavelengths and tones and perspectives, and that by the time you get to the stanza after that where it says, this isn't like the bad luck, not like our deep rage, it would mean the same thing almost if it said, this is, I mean, we've felt, this is like our bad luck, this is like our deep rage. And an old note that one of my teachers used to give me that said, when you're having trouble with a poem, just put a knot into it. And that, because poems come out of something that pushes, that says, what's making you want to say not? It's the feeling that this is, right? There's always, so I love the way those three stanzas, the slice of life short one, and then the long one that doesn't mention the not, and then the medium-sized one with the unmistakable not that contradicts what we've just been feeling, but can't because we were let feel it for so long. That's an example of what the whole poem is doing in making us, again, feel that mystery, that enchantment, that are we like this? Are we not like this? This is life, oh good. This isn't life, oh good. You know, in a nutshell.
Ooh.
And in the middle of that, the Max Sennett early comedies come out, which is a brilliant counterpoint
Wonderful.
to the seriousness of everything.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that moment also, and with just a terrific description, very economical description of what those old silent movie comedies were like. I think one of the, and I find this kind of breathtaking in the poem, looking at the next to the last stanza and looking at the, I mean, I think this is a poem with impeccable and wonderful line breaks. And I'm looking at the first line of the next to the last stanza, the question of what makes a man is really, it's a poem that actually can encompass that. It's like the history carved out of forest in the opening line. It's a poem that can bring into its compass the largest issues and then make those issues very immediate and specific and delicate even. The question of what makes a man slump when his form, his eye, his power aren't to blame. This isn't like the bad luck that hounds us. And his frustration in the games, not like our deep rage for disappointing ourselves. And that there's such a humane insight into these human qualities that's so really moving and profound in this poem. I mean, just even to call the poem baseball is almost an understatement. I'm just, you know, I do think this is very extraordinary. I love comparing it to the idea of order at Key West. That it's a poem that really does take on very large issues in a very
light-handed way.
Yeah, in a very real and understated and unpretentious way. Yeah, there's that magic, the mystery of accidents always contained, not like yeah, I'm I'm so glad we're talking about this.
Lloyd?
Yeah. But the ballpark is an artifact. Like, you know, as Stephen said, it like poetry. The order of the ball game, the firm structure with the mystery of accidents. It's about poetry, and as well as life, as well as baseball.
Lloyd.
Yehudi has his hand up.
Oh, Yehudi. Oh, hi.
No, hi.
Hi.
Just the.
Oh, how nice to see you.
I've been here. We've been here all along.
I know.
But we're mutes. The reference to the informality and the charm of the baseball title reminds me of Brahms sending symphonies to Clara Schumann and identifying them as a bagatelle. But I wonder, is it any use to any interest in talking about this and comparing it, or talking about it in reference to Marianne Moore's poem about baseball?
I like this better.
Oh, me too. I mean, there's no comparison, really. No comparison. And yet, you know, in general, Marianne Moore is a great poet.
Yeah.
And a great baseball fan.
Evidently, but a Brooklyn Dodger fan, I think.
Right.
Which, of course, discredits her significantly.
or gives her lots of props.
Oh, I'm glad this is virtual.
Well, I was brought up as a New York Giant fan, and of course, so that I lived right near the Polo Grounds. So of course, when they left, I felt that sense of deep rage and disappointment in myself and with the Giants, and I gave up baseball forever until I came to Boston.
And that, yes, and then I moved to Boston.
And then I moved to Boston.
Yeah. My connection with baseball is also a little odd because I lived in Brooklyn, but I was a Yankee fan because my mother worked across the street from Yankee Stadium. And she was a diehard Yankee fan, which is what I became, which put me in a very awkward position vis-a-vis my friends in my neighborhood.
I would say endangered.
Endangered, yes. Yeah, that was that was tough. And then I moved to Queens, and then that was okay. It was okay to be a fanatic Yankee in Queens.
Is that the era of? Was that the era for the Dodgers? Leo DeRocher, the manager
of the Giants.
Of the Dodgers. No,
DeRocher.
Yeah, I think you're correct.
Yeah. Leo DeRocher was a manager for many years, a ferocious guy. Actually.
Yeah, no,
yeah.
Married to Lorraine Day.
Married to Lorraine Day, yes.
But we don't.
That I remembered.
You know what poem this is reminding me of? It's not a baseball poem at all. There's an Emily Dickinson poem in 3 stanzas. It starts, I would not paint a picture. I'd rather be the one. And then she describes looking at the painting. And then she doesn't want to be a musician. And the last stanza starts, I would not be a poet. It's the same sort of setup of, anyway, this is making me think of all the different not poems.
Yeah. I think I'm not reading the chats. It's just one thing too many for me to juggle, but I thought I saw some reference to Elizabeth Bishop in.
I put 2 poems in there. I mean, again, there's so many ways to play with that knot. And one is another little Stevens poem, Disillusionment of 10 o'clock, that it tells you what Is my connection gone?
You're fine now, but you dropped out
I was going to say
for a second.
It's a bad connection, but Bishop's one art, the art of losing, isn't hard to master.
It's not hard.
Again, that's one where the poem plays out a wonderful range of why you would want to try to say it's not what it is. So.
Well, that there's a kind of central irony in just the way the poem is just being presented to you, that immediately kind of twist your brain around. In which, Gail?
It's also a bravura. If she took the knot out, it would be pathos. The poem would be pathos.
Yeah.
By negating it, it's false courage. An assumption of a position of false courage.
Yeah.
It's what makes for the lightness of both poems. I'm not going to make a grand claim about metaphor for life, and I'm not going to make this other pathetic statement, but it will come in backwards.
Just saying it on the page, does it? But it's the only way, it's the only way in.
Gail, you have written other good baseball poems. And I wonder if you would be willing to read us one of them.
They're not as good as this one.
Well, nothing is as good as this one. But I'd love to hear another one.
Let me see.
I can tell you a page number.
I got it.
Okay.
Because you mentioned it to me before. This is very different. It's called, I mean, it would have to be very different. It would have to be. Listening to baseball in the car. This morning, I argued with a friend about angels. I didn't believe in his belief in them. I can't believe they're not a metaphor. Our argument, affectionate, lacking in animus, went nowhere. We promised to talk again soon. Now, when I'm driving away from Boston and the Red Sox are losing, I hear the announcer say, "No angels in the sky today. Baseball ease for a cloudless afternoon. No shadows to help a man who waits in the outfield, staring into the August sun." Although I know the announcer's not a rabbi or sage, no, he's a sort of sage, disconsolate philosopher of batting slumps and injuries. Still, I can scan the pale blue sky through my polarized windshield, fervently hopeful for my fading team, and I feel something a little foolish, a prayerful throbbing in my throat, and remember being told years ago that man was only little lower than the angels. Floating ahead of me at the Vermont border, I see a few wispy horsemane clouds, which I quietly pray will drift down to Fenway Park, where a demonic opponent has just slammed another Red Sox pitch, and the center fielder, call him Jim, runs back, looking heavenward, and is shielded and doesn't lose the white ball in the glare.
Thank you.
Gorgeous. Just
Wonderful.
great poem. Also,
thank you.
Sky and earth. Sky and earth.
Yeah.
Man and spirits. Wonderful. And the Red Sox losing. It's a permanent poem.
You don't have a World Series, a poem about the Red Sox winning the World Series, do you?
No, that would be beyond. That would be no.
Hard to describe paradise.
No, I think all my baseball poems were written before Theo became general manager of the Red Sox, I think. No, except for baseball, except for the one title, baseball.
Do you know if any Red Sox have actually seen your poems? Have you ever heard from anyone on the
No.
Connected?
I'm sure they're all illiterate. Auden Icarus.
Lloyd.
Yes, Yehudi.
You know, illiterate, yes, but incredibly smart. When you begin to understand how they process an incredible amount of data, then knowing exactly which inning, which pitch, which fielder, years and years and years of statistics. And you begin to have a kind of respect, even though they talk like monkeys. I mean, it's all so conventional and the lingo is all so limited, but the intelligence there and the intensity is really extraordinary. And I think Gail's talking about that at one point where she talks about the tension between the pitcher and the catcher, or almost electric intensity and concentration involved. Anyway.
I like also the image of holding up his hand and as in a kind of benediction, but of course he's the catcher, and of course he's holding up his hand.
Right, you better.
That's like Buddha. Right?
But there have been some very bright
Very bright.
baseball writers and baseball players turned writers
And commentators.
and Joe Garagiola, who endeared himself to me by telling that in 1952 the worst team in baseball, the Pittsburgh Pirates, lost more games than anybody else, had a victory party when a doubleheader was rained out. But I lived in the city long enough to watch them beat the Yankees, and that, of course, was another miracle.
Yeah.
I was asked to read it at a baseball, a baseball event that was celebrating in Fenway Park in the private quarters, a biography of Babe Ruth by my friend Jane Levy. And so there were some bases there, and she asked me to read it. But you know, the other thing about the Red Sox that's really literary is what happened when Harry Frazee sold Babe Ruth to the Yankees.
Could you repeat, Gail, could you repeat that? You just dropped out for a second.
Okay. One of the big things about the charisma of the tragic history of the Red Sox, it began when Harry Frazee, who was a part owner, wanted to invest in a Broadway show, probably with Ruby Dee, and he sold Babe Ruth to the Yankees. And that was like the curse on the Red Sox, you know, until our era when the Red Sox started to win again. But I think people called it the curse of the Babe.
Curse of the Bambino.
Yeah.
You know, yeah.
Actually, I think that I've always thought that the curse was Tommy Harper's, who had to sue the Red Sox for racial discrimination, and it wasn't until they didn't win the series until they hired Harper and actually were redeemed for Yawkey's years of racism. But that's my political take on it.
Well, you're right, but it was a period that ran from the teens or the 20s through the Yawkey era, that there was no success.
Right.
You know, so it was both stories.
Oh, as a Kansas City Athletics fan, I can remember it was whether Boston or Kansas City was going to be in the cellar.
Atlas Royals. Can I say something?
Yes, please.
There was a submarine.
I'm just flooded with baseball memories, but the one that just bubbled to the top, I was listening to the radio in 2004, and this was when it was still on the bubble. And some commentator said, you know, if the Red Sox win, they won't even know how to celebrate. We totally knew how.
They did.
Got it.
That they did. Well, I'm looking at Marina in the library and wearing her mask, and so grateful for your patience, and think that maybe we should allow you some freedom, and to thank you again for your hospitality, indispensable hospitality. And Gail, thank you so much for being willing to participate in this. Thank you.
Thank you all. It's been so much fun.
What a pleasure to hear your poem and think about it and hear you read it and hear your comments. And thank you everyone for showing up to the discussion today.
Loud, Johnny.
Susan and Yehudi, very nice to actually see you for the first time in a while. Though we've always looked forward to hearing you. And thank you everyone for coming today. You'll get some word about next month's discussion. I don't know what it's going to be yet, but thank you everyone, and have a great weekend.
Thanks a lot, Lloyd.
Everyone. Thank you,
And-
Gail. Thank you, Lloyd.
Thank you,
Take
Lloyd.
care.
Thank you, Marie.
Thank you, Selena.
Yeah.
Great to see you.
And I hope we do one of these discussions of one of your poems in your book, your new book, sometime.
Well, we'll think about that.
Who's going to lead
Rita?
the discussion?
I'm sure Gail will be thrilled to be with us to help us discuss those new poems, Lloyd's new.
Well, thank you.
Yes, I
Thank
will.
you for asking.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye,
Take care.
everyone. and
Bye-bye.
thanks.
Bye. Thank you for listening.
Oh, it's lovely. It was really lovely. Thank you.